Hello folks, Peter Lawn here. Welcome to my beginner's tutorial series on how to use Blender to build bases in No Man's Sky. This is part 3 of a series that will focus on some Blender tips and tricks to help you along the way to make those awesome Blender bases in the game. This tutorial is designed for PC users only, and if you're unfamiliar with the software needed, please check out parts 1 and 2 of this series for an overview of software setup and workflow, as well as backing up your files and the import-export process. We're going to completely ignore the No Man's Sky plugin for Blender in this part and only focus on Blender itself. Part 4 of the series will be completely dedicated to the features of the plugin. Even though this is a beginner's tutorial with Blender, I'm going to focus on tools and techniques that we will use to build bases for No Man's Sky. You will notice I will skip over the vast amounts of tools and options that we normally use in Blender. I'm going to stress the important aspects of software, including shortcut commands and features to manipulate base objects, and some key workflow tips that will help you use the tool for your base designs. Using Blender to build your No Man's Sky bases allows you very precise control of base parts placement, including rotation and scaling that exceeds the in-game limitations. This opens the door to very creative and fun base designs. Be aware that Blender is a massive program and can do a ton of things. However, you only need to know a fraction of these features to be a great Blender builder. You will not need to know anything about animation, materials, sculpting, rigging, UV wrapping, or a ton of other cool things Blender does to build bases in No Man's Sky. Alright, so let's have a look at the Blender interface. First thing we're going to do is make more room on our main 3D display window. We won't be using the No Man's Sky plugin interface in this session, so let's get rid of this window for the moment. We can do this by hitting N to toggle the sidebar display, which is the inset screen area here. You can bring it back anytime by hitting N again. Let's take a look at the window areas on the interface. The main window is where we can view and modify the 3D models in our base. And because we are in a 3D workspace, you'll notice that the red line is the x-axis, the green line is the y-axis, by the way, which is the direction our base computer is pointing along when we import the base, and up-down is the blue z-axis. We can visualize this when we move an object using the transform tool. We're going to move this pipe x along the x-axis, y along the y-axis, and z along the up and down z-axis. The base computer imports at 0, 0, 0 location in the center of our 3D workspace. Along the very top, you have your drop-down menu items that will allow you to perform file operations and edit actions. I hardly use anything other than those two options when base building. You have the toolbar on the top left here. I hardly use this as well, as I mainly use shortcut keys, which I will provide as we go along. But you can explore them and see what they do. First one is the item select tool. I leave my preference on box select because that's just the way I like to do it, where you can left mouse click and drag and draw a box around objects to select them. More on selection tools and techniques later, but you can select items using other methods as well by left click and hold this button down while dragging down to another selection. For example, let's select objects by circle, or by lasso if you want to. Next tool is a 3D positioning cursor. You can click on the 3D workspace to position this cursor anywhere in the workspace. We'll get into using this cursor for some advanced stuff later on, but you can think of the cursor as a place marker that you can do some cool things like rotate objects around it and snap objects to it, etc. Also, if you want to position the cursor back to home at the base computer at 0, 0, 0, hit the Shift plus C key, which also puts your whole base into view in the 3D viewport. The other tools that are cool to play with as well. You can rotate, scale, and transform objects, but I hardly ever use this toolbox in my base builds because we're going to use all those functions with shortcut keys, which I will demonstrate. There are some other menus up top on the left, and we will touch on these as we go, but won't go into detail on this session, as most we're not going to be using in our base building. For No Man's Sky base builds and base parts manipulation, you should always be in object mode here. In the center of the screen, you will see two little drop-downs lists that are called Transform Orientations and Transform Pivot Points. We will be working a lot with these two settings in our Blender base builds. They control how base objects are moved, rotated, and scaled relative to their own positions, or relative to the 3D cursor, or relative to the global orientation system. More on this later. On the far right, you will see two windows. The top section is our Scene Collections window, which is really important in our builds. It will show you all the base objects in the project. You have the ability to group, select, hide, and lock base objects from this window. We'll dive into some uses of this section in some of the more advanced tutorials. This list can get quite long, so if you move your mouse over to the right hand side of the list, you'll see a little scroll bar that appears, and you can grab with the left mouse button, click and drag to quickly scroll up and down on this list. One setting I would recommend is to set the filter option by clicking this drop down at the top right, and in the restrictions toggle, click to activate the selectable option, which is the little arrow icon. And then also hide in viewport option, the little eye icon. Both these options will show alongside items in your scene list and will allow you to selectively hide or lock an object in the workspace window. For example, it's impossible to move your base computer as the object is locked from movement through its own properties. However, you could inadvertently delete the base computer, which you don't want to do. I would highlight the base computer by left-clicking on it here in this window or in the 3D window, then lock it from selection by clicking the little arrow icon that's beside it. This way you won't accidentally delete the base computer. The lower window on the right side is the Properties window, and if you're a standard Blender user, you would be working a lot with these windows and different options. But for Blender's No Man's Sky base building, we never get into these menus, so you can minimize it entirely by dragging it at the top and dragging it down. Because this video is going to be somewhat lengthy, I'm going to use this area to display the current topic, so you can scrub through the video to find what you want. You'll notice these little buttons up here at the top right of the display, along with this 3D gizmo here. These are all tools for manipulating your viewport and how you're currently looking at your scene in the 3D window. We'll talk more about these next in the Scene Views section coming up. Alright, so let's have a look at Scene Views, specifically rotating, panning, and zooming your scene. By default, Blender assumes you have a 3-button mouse, and with the middle mouse button, you can control panning and rotating your view. I only have a 2-button mouse, so I'll show you how to adjust the settings to emulate a 3-button mouse. Click on the Edit menu and go down to Preferences. Along the left-hand side, go down to Input and check the Emulate 3-button mouse checkbox. What this does is allow you to use the left Alt button to emulate the middle mouse button. So now I can rotate my view around my scene by using the left Alt, or you can use the middle mouse button and click dragging your mouse to rotate the view around your scene. You can effectively do the same thing by clicking anywhere on the empty space of this gizmo at the top right of the main window, and left mouse and click and drag. And now introducing the most important key in Blender, the numpad period key. This is discussed in the item selection section later, but it warrants a discussion now since this key will focus your view on the currently selected items. Rotating your view will now rotate around these selected items. This is a great key to reset Blender's view that sometimes gets messed up when you're doing a lot of zooming, rotating, and panning on your scene. Speaking of panning, to pan your view, hold the Shift plus Alt key and then left mouse click and drag. And again, you can click on the little hand icon at the top right of the screen to perform the same function. To zoom in and out of your scene, use your mouse wheel. This will zoom in and out of the currently selected item, or alternatively, left mouse click and drag and the little magnifying button at the top of the main window, and it'll do the same thing. Alright, so let's have a look at how you can change to useful views in your 3D viewport of your base scene. Controlling from what angle you want to look at your base is important. The numpad on your keyboard comes into play here and offers a variety of ways to look at your scene. The ones I use most are numpad 7, top view, and numpad 1, front orthographic view, and numpad 3, right orthographic view. Orthographic means you don't get any perspective in the view, and it's super handy if, for example, you want to move an object exactly along a certain axis. In this front view, you are moving an object perfectly along the y-axis, that is, perpendicular to the view. When in ortho view, you can also click on the center of the viewport gizmo here at the top right of your main window. It will toggle your view 180 degrees from the other side. So if I'm looking right to left, I can toggle to look at the base from left to right. Or if I was looking at the base from the front, I can toggle to the back, or looking at the top view to the bottom view, and then back. Be aware that panning and zooming will maintain the ortho view perspective, but as soon as you rotate your view, you will lose the ortho view again. A note about the numpad period key when selecting objects. If you select a whole bunch of items and hit the numpad period key, it will focus the view to all selected items. Also, if you select an item in the collections list in the right top window, then move your mouse to the main window and hit the numpad period, the scene view will focus to that object. Sometimes you need to get access to view areas of your base that are covered or hidden by other objects. To get an unobstructed view of, say, the inside of my building, I can select a whole group of objects and use the H key to temporarily hide them. Now I can see what I'm doing in the building. When I'm done, I just hit the Alt-H key again to make them visible. Note that all the base objects will still export as part of the base assets, whether they are hidden or not. Another useful tool is this button up here at the top right of the main display called Toggle X-Ray. What this does is to make all your base objects in the scene opaque or slightly see-through. This is super handy if you need to visualize or work on an object buried in another object. So now we're going to talk about selecting and deselecting objects in the scene. There are a lot of ways to select items in Blender. You can select an object by left mouse clicking on an object in the main 3D window. Notice it is outlined with a light orange color. You can select objects either in the main window or also by left mouse click on the object in the Scene Object list at the far right. Again, use the numpad period key to locate the object in the main window. If you hold the Shift plus left mouse click, you now add other objects to the total objects selected, and you can continue to add objects this way. If you want to select all objects on your base, with the cursor in the main window, hit the A key. This will select everything that is not hidden previously with the H key or made invisible in the Scene Object list at the top right. To deselect all selected objects, just click anywhere on a blank space or quickly double tap the A key. You'll notice that when selecting multiple objects that one of the objects is active object is a lighter orange color, while the others are a darker orange color. It's hard to see this sometimes, especially with colored objects, but it's important to note which object is the active object at all times, especially when moving or aligning objects, which we'll look at later. If you select an item in the main window, you can also move your mouse over the Scene Object list and hit the numpad period key. This list will scroll to focus on that object highlighted by orange. You'll also notice a small orange point when you select an item. This is called the item's origin. All objects have an origin point. The object's origin can be used as a reference point when aligning, rotating, or sizing an object. You can box select objects when you are in box select mode, which I usually keep as a default, by clicking and dragging a select box around multiple objects. You'll notice you don't have to select the entire object with the box to select it. Each time you use box select, it resets the currently selected items. If you want to make the box select cumulative, hold the Shift plus box select to add objects to the overall selection. To deselect objects with the box select, hold the Control plus box select to only unselect the items in the box selection area, or again, click anywhere on an empty space to unselect everything. There are a number of other select methods available by click dragging on the select toolbar at the top left. I won't go into these in detail, but you can experiment with them. I do want to mention one selection tool that isn't shown on this list but is available when you are in any of the select tool modes. This tool is activated by pressing the C key. It looks like a circle select tool and it works somewhat similar, except it's resizable, using the mouse wheel to increase or decrease selection area. And the selections are automatically cumulative. To unselect objects without impacting the rest of the selection, hold the Alt plus left mouse click. To deactivate this tool, click on the right mouse button to cancel. This tool is extremely handy when you're selecting, say, a circled floor. You'll also notice that this selection tool needs to encompass the object origin in the select circle region to be able to affect an object selection or deselection. This is different than the box selection tool, which will select an object no matter what part of the object is in the box select area. This is a super handy tool when you're intricately selecting a number of objects and you accidentally select something you didn't want to. In this case, I wanted to select only the support posts here, but accidentally shift-clicked on some other parts. I just hit the C to bring up the circle select tool and then hold the Alt key while mouse clicking on the origins to deselect the items I don't want in my overall selection. That way I don't have to reselect everything. Now that we can control how we look at things and we got an overview of selecting items, let's look at the different ways you can move base objects. We talked earlier about the transform orientation drop-down box at the top of the main window here. We're going to select global because we want to demonstrate how this mode works. In global mode, if I select the move tool at the top left of our main window here and select this cylinder object, you can visualize and move it along the global orientation system by left mouse click and drag on the red X axis and release the mouse to position it. If you want to cancel this move before releasing the left mouse button, click on the right mouse button, which is the cancel operation button. Alternatively, you can also hit the Control plus Z key to undo the last operation. By using the associated arrows, you can also move this cylinder along the green Y axis or along the up-down blue axis. Rather than using the move tool though, you can also use the shortcut key for move by pressing the G key, followed by the X, Y, or Z key for the axis movement. In addition, following the shortcut keys X, Y, or Z, you can also type in the required distance you want to move the object along those axes and press Enter to move the object precisely at that distance. Pay attention to the area in the main window at the top left of the display while you are moving an object. This will display the amount of movement, either positive or negative, you're moving the object along those axes relative to the object's current position. By default, the distances in Blender are in meters, and this interestingly relates directly to the units distance in No Man's Sky. Let's see what happens now when we change the transform orientation drop-down at the top of the main window to normal mode. In normal mode, the axis of movement now becomes relative to the object's current orientation rather than to our global X, Y, and Z axis. You can visualize this when I select the move tool and note the different orientation of the X, Y, and Z axis of this cylinder that is laying down. See how the axis orientation changes when I toggle between global and normal modes at the top of the screen. I'm going to annotate these two cylinders to show how normal mode operates with more than one object selected. Because of the way these two cylinders are orientated in the scene, you can see what happens if I select both cylinders in normal mode. The axis movement will follow the active object, or the light orange object, in this case cylinder A. If I shift left mouse click on B cylinder, making it the active one, the axis orientation will change to follow the B cylinder's object orientation. We're going to examine this behavior as well as use of local orientation setting in more advanced tutorials of Blender. But for now, just be aware of the differences in movement when you're in global or normal mode transform setting. When building Blender bases, one common tool I often use is the Align tool. Let's say you have three items, a cylinder, a pipe, and a cube object, and you want to stack them perfectly over the cylinder object. You can do this by selecting the pipe and cube and then selecting the item you want to align width last, in this case the cylinder. You can access this tool by hitting the F3 key to search for the command and enter a line in the search window, and then click on the Align Objects and hit Enter. Initially, you would say, hey, wait a minute, they didn't align the way I wanted them to. Don't panic. There's a further refinement you can do to the command, as you'll notice a context-sensitive menu called Align Objects menu down in the bottom left-hand of the main Windows screen that you can expand and further select the axis you want your objects to follow. In this case, I want X and Y, so I click the X and then shift-click the Y axis to include it. Now you see all three objects are aligned along their point of origin. Alright, so let's take a look at rotating, sizing, and duplicating objects. Rotating an object is easy. Just select a single or multiple objects, in this case using box select to grab the floor plate and teleporter here, and hit the R key to rotate it. Left mouse click to complete the operation. However, in this case, I just want to turn the teleporter around. Let's undo this rotation. I'll hit the Control Z, and let's just grab the teleporter only. Hit R key to rotate, followed by the axis I want to rotate the object around, in this case the Z key. I can also type in the amount of degrees of rotation by typing 180 and hit Enter, and it will snap to the 180 degree rotation. Again, the axis the object can be rotated around will be affected by the global or normal transform orientation current setting. If I change this to normal, see how I hit R followed by the Y key this time and get the same effect. This is easier to visualize if you use the rotation tool in the upper left window. You can see this little rotation gizmo appears around the selected objects, and these handles allow you to left mouse click and drag to rotate along the axis you want. Again, play with the global and normal settings to see how it affects the axis directions. You'll notice that the rotation point is by default the object's origin. Selecting multiple objects will rotate each object around its own origin. This is because we have the pivot point setting drop-down at the top of the main window set to individual origins. This becomes more apparent when I separate the teleporter from the floor plate and I select both items and now rotate along the Z-axis. You will see each object rotates around its own origin point. If you change the setting to the median point, the rotation pivot now becomes the middle point between the two objects. Sometimes it's handy when performing rotation to look at your base from the orthographic views using the numpad. Performing the same rotation of the teleporter can be done from top-down view, numpad 7, without hitting the axis key. There are a number of rotation settings using the pivot point drop-down, so play with these to see the different effects they have on your objects as you rotate them. Scaling or resizing objects can be done by selecting your objects and hitting the S key, and left mouse click and drag to change the size. Click the left mouse button to complete the operation, or right mouse button to cancel the operation. Control Z will undo the sizing. Sizing can also be performed by the Size tool in the upper left of the main window. However, I do not recommend using this tool, as if you scale a No Man's Sky object along a single axis only, distorting the model, it will show up in the game normally with no scale applied. You need to apply universal scale along all axes. That's why using the S hotkey is the best method. Scaling, like rotating, is also affected by the pivot point setting at the top of the screen. So again, adjust these settings to see how they impact your scaling options and where the scale occurs from. The transform tool at the top left of your screen combines rotation and move functions in one gizmo for your objects. You can play with this to see the effects of grabbing and dragging various handles on the objects you have selected. To duplicate or copy objects, just select an object or multiple objects and hit the Shift plus D key to make another copy. The copied item or items will be highlighted, and you can move them where you want and left mouse click to complete the copy operation. After you've hit duplicate and Shift D, you can move along the copied items along the desired axes by hitting either X, Y, or Z keys, and you can even move them to the desired distance from the original by directly typing in a transform value and hitting Enter. So I think I ran this video a little longer than I wanted to, but it covers the basics of Blender commands you will use when building bases in No Man's Sky. Be sure to check out part 4 of this series, which will focus on the Blender plugin, and also part 5, which will look at the advanced base building techniques in Blender, where we work with collections, the 3D cursor, and object manipulation. Thanks for watching.